so excited to get started. I'm Lena Bankert. I'm a partner with Bellwether Education Partners, and I will be moderating the conversation today and really hoping to keep anything that I say to a bare minimum and give these 5 incredible leaders a lot of airtime and voice to share their stories. The point of today's conversation is to talk about innovation and where we see it headed over the coming years. When I step back and I think about innovation that I saw 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you heard a lot of words and language and energy around personalized learning, around adaptive technology, around no excuses, and part and parcel with a lot of those conversations came dialogue around growth and how fast can you expand and bring those models to more kids. I feel like in many ways, the conversation is pulled back from that, and you're hearing innovation and newness in many different ways. In some ways, it's going back to basics, and it's going back to models or ideas that have been around for forever. Think about Montessori, think about experiential learning. And in other ways, it's really being able to pull out and deliver impact in ways that haven't really been thought about before, really co-creating models deeply by engaging communities, thinking about serving student populations that have barely been on the radar in the past, thinking about connecting learning even more deeply and profoundly to workplace and life after the K12 system. So today we're going to unpack a lot of that. We're going to talk about the why and the intentionality that these school leaders have put into designing their school models. And then we'll talk about the how those have played out for some in their early years, for others over many years, and lessons learned that they might be able to share with you. So I'm going to turn it over to them. I have asked them to prepare a 6-word memoir as a little teaser to start. A 6-word memoir, you might know, is a challenge to be able to tell your story in 6 words, channeling Ernest Hemingway, and being able to do that in as crisp and concise a way as possible. We'll start there, and then we'll go more into their stories. Scott, you're sitting next to me. We'll start with you.
So, innovation, collaboration, challenges, diversity, equity, and access.
Whole child and student voice focused.
Innovation is messy. I do it anyway.
Changing learning to change the world.
Authoring narratives of inspired, purposeful lives.
Little teaser there. I'm going to ask us to go in the opposite direction now. Travis, let's start with you. Say more about the why and the intentionality that went into Valor's design.
A big part of the way that our school model and design came about was our founders had a belief that we have a responsibility not just to ensure that our students are academically successful, but that they're growing into living inspired and purposeful lives. And so a big, I think a gift that we had in terms of being innovative and the idea of like thinking outside the box is that our chief culture officer comes from another box. He's not from an education background. And so he has a background in family and child therapy. And so he began with things that he knew about the ways in which that we know kids and adults can grow to live inspired, purposeful lives. And so that comes from having a balance of understanding this sort of like mind, heart, body, spirit. And so our model grew out of that. And a big driver for that is an idea of narrative theory. And if you're not familiar with narrative theory, it draws on other sort of postmodern theories that examine issues of power and privilege and ways in which we can create and co-create and recreate our own identities. And so for us, like empowering individuals to be the authors of their own narrative, their own stories, is a way in which we think that individuals can grow to live truly inspired and purposeful lives.
Michelle, you're next.
So the mission of Teton Science Schools is to inspire curiosity, engagement, and leadership through transformative place-based education. And Teton Science Schools started about 50 years ago. There was a science teacher in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, who kind of looked around at the beautiful landscape and said, wow, we're really not leveraging place or experiencing place through the curriculum that he was delivering. And so he started and kind of more field-based, science-based program out in Grand Teton National Park. Easy place to be inspired. And that program grew and really began in those field education roots with groups coming from all over the country to visit the Tetons and learn about the ecosystem there. And the programming kind of expanded beyond science and into many other realms. In around 2002, so more recently, we really thought about kind of, wow, we're serving all these wonderful school groups from really all over the world, but we're really not serving as much our local population. And we had fifth graders that would come from our local schools to visit, but we really saw a need for a different type of education, for really changing the system of education. And so we launched an independent school. So that independent school, as I said, we now have one school. We've merged our two schools into one school with two campuses. So there's a campus on the Jackson side and a campus on the Teton Valley side. And our mission continues to be, transformative place-based education. So in this time in our world where we are so connected in so many ways, there really is such a lack of connection to the natural world and really to each other, and really thinking about how can we infuse curriculum, so the way students learn every day, with that connection to place, and what are those knowledge, what is the skills, what are the dispositions of a whole child that really enables them to succeed and make decisions in what is becoming a very complicated and rapidly changing world.
I don't know if I remember the question.
The why.
The
behind
why.
your school
Okay,
model.
so for Thrival, it's different because Thrival is not my brain baby. A lot of people think I came up with the idea for the study abroad. I did not. I inherited it, and what I was charged to do was take a nonprofit, a program, and turn that into a school. So I'm responsible for infusing everything into Thrival that prepares the students for the experience and also for their senior year and for college and beyond. The why for me is that I'm an Indianapolis kid. I'm from a city where we don't have access to much, even of our own city. So we definitely don't have access to our country or the world. During the time where I was designing Thrival, I lost various former students and classmates. And I knew that there's just something I know, and I've always known there's something that I will do to impact my community, and I didn't know what that would be. And at the time, Thrival became that thing. Thrival for me is a way to teach students, to teach people how to be problem solvers, how to be critical thinkers, how to be community leaders and partners. And part of that is going outside of our community, outside of our country, learning how people are solving problems there and bringing those solutions back to our community. And I believe that even if I'm only touching 60 students a year or 100 students a year, those students go back to their homes, to their communities, and they touch 5 to 10 other people, and it's exponential. So that's my why.
So at Rise High in Los Angeles, we wanted to really look at what it would mean to wrap the school around the student instead of trying to force fit the student into a model that we thought was really cool. And we wanted to do it specifically for an entire group of kids that have largely been left out of the traditional school narrative. And so our school serves primarily credit deficient youth who have had significant disruptions in their educational pathways due to a variety of life circumstances. We have a lot of students who are navigating the foster system or were former foster youth. We have students who are navigating the probation system, navigating housing instability or homelessness. And kind of what we were seeing coming from an educational background where we were teachers in the classroom first, we were seeing that the students who were already behind and already had the most difficulty in accessing education were then the least likely to get the supports that they need and to be able to access an environment that was really going to be responsive to their incredibly unique needs. And so one, as I said, seeking to really wrap the school model around them and to do that in a consistent way, knowing that being responsive means it's an ongoing practice. What our model looks like today may look very different next week if we're really being responsive to our students' needs. And then two, kind of bringing back to the forefront this question of what do we really mean when we talk about equity. It's not just the academic outcomes, it's are you prepared socio-emotionally? Are you prepared to engage with and pursue a career that you're really passionate about, that you enjoy, not just that we told you should have? And also, are you able to access the joy of learning and relevance and rigor and be able to participate in learning that is fun for you? I think we started to see pretty early on that on top of everything else, our kids were really denied the opportunity to just be kids. And so figuring out what that means alongside them in this process.
So for us, Purdue Polytechnic, and again, we're in downtown Indianapolis, the last three words I used were diversity, equity, and access, and those were the drivers on the why. Indianapolis Public Schools, which is the largest school district in the state of Indiana, graduated close to around 10,000 students over the last 5 years, and they sent 38 students of color to Purdue, right? And Purdue is one of the largest universities in the state of Indiana, and obviously focused in around STEM fields, which is really driving the economy of central Indiana, right? So Salesforce has their second headquarters there, employs 3,000 or 4,000 people. Infosys is in the process of hiring 8,000 people. And if you don't have that kind of preparation, and if you don't have the access, you're shut out of those, right? And that's what drove us. We have to increase the pipeline because while it's very clear, and if you look at the statistics in Indianapolis, central Indiana, or I'm guessing also the country, there is clearly an achievement gap, right? In terms of people not just graduating high school, but going on into a higher end field of some sort. And our fundamental belief is that there's clearly an achievement gap, but there is not a possibility gap. There's not a potential gap. There's not a capability gap. There's a preparation gap. And we want to close that. And so when we get into the why or the hows later, that's why we decided to kind of blow up the high school model and do it differently to try and get to that.
So one of the themes that I'm hearing is this really intentional thought around who is the student that we're serving and how are we going to build a model that really keeps their needs, their interests at the forefront. Carrie, I'm going to start with you for this question. Say a little bit about how you guys brought voice of the student and their unique needs into the school design.
Yeah. The students were a part of the process, I would say the driving part of the process from the very beginning, and from the very beginning conversations. Erin, our assistant principal, and myself, we both started as classroom teachers. And so we were teaching in high school and middle school and also in different parts of the country. And so he was in Miami and I was in Los Angeles, and then I taught in South Carolina, which is where I'm from, and he was teaching in LA. And we were kind of hearing and seeing the same things from students, which they were just like, this is not set up for me. The kids that we are now serving, they were saying that consistently. You know, when I have to be out for a court date, that's used as an absence against me, and then I get a certain number and you won't let me move on to the next grade level, but also I don't have a choice in whether or not I'm going to these court dates. Or I am, you know, my family is doubled up in an apartment on the other side of town and we have no transportation to get to school, and then I get back and I'm behind, but there's nothing built into the system to make sure that I'm getting what I need so I can keep moving forward. And so we knew that we had not personally had those experiences growing up, and so to really create a model that was responsive, we were going to have to center the experiences and the identities of our students, that they would 100% know better what they needed than we would. And so they were involved in the design team. We have student ambassadors now who inform kind of our next steps. They give us feedback on everything from curriculum, the electives they want to see, how they think we should be spending our time leading the school. From there, we started bringing in the voices of their stakeholders. And so yes, bio families, but also foster families and mentors and social workers and probation officers, and really kind of trying to get out the way and let them lead the process, because we can come up with what we may think are the coolest ideas, things that we're really passionate about, and then roll it out to kids and it falls flat on its face because that's not what they wanted, it's not what they needed. And so we really try as much as possible to kind of continue to incorporate that into the way that we're leading and innovating on what we have already, just constantly going back to them and seeing what it is that they really need and want.
Michelle, same question for you. Teton is such a deep place-based model. So how do you bring the voice of the community into what you all do?
So that really looks for us through learning on a daily basis, and we do that mainly through project-based learning, and student voice and choice is really where project-based learning starts from in terms of, so we might have an idea, or a teacher has an idea of kind of an umbrella like physics or chemistry that they want to talk about, but how you get there and the specific competencies that we use to get there, that's really driven by the student, and that looks different pre-K to 12. But it really is about the student interest and that student interest and aligning that with real world problem solving. So looking at actual issues related to place, and for young students that is very close, that could be their own classroom, certainly their own town. Those older kids are really thinking at a more global level and thinking about real world problems and how they are creating a driving question that will end in actually a public product that they will share that will hopefully be solution oriented to that problem. And we see that as a real critical skill in their learning. And going along with that is our shift to competency-based assessment, and that's a real effort to kind of flip the assessment, kind of traditional assessment standards on their head and kind of unbounding assessment from time and saying for truly to be personalized and to assess in that way, really meeting the students where they are and giving them the opportunity to add the depth to their learning and then create those specific rubrics for them. And the older kids, our middle schoolers, for example, when they design a project, they'll actually create their own rubric and create those competencies. So they really have a hand in designing and the agency that goes into that from the get-go, and that really shows in how engaged they are in their own learning opportunities.
So another big shift that I've seen over the past 5 to 10 years is a move away from just thinking about the academic and curriculum program, and also bringing in this whole child social emotional learning, and in particular doing so in a way that's not isolated or standalone from what kids are learning, really thinking about that holistic program that brings kids through. Travis, I know this is deeply embedded in the fabric of Valor, so say a little more about social emotional learning and where you guys are pushing that.
So for us, we really wanted to take a look at what are the ways in which our kids and their families are showing up at school and in the school community that's going to feel very different and not be exclusively focused on academic success. And so if we're really going to distribute value in these other parts of ourselves as human beings, then we need to first of all, we need to commit to repurposing some of those valuable instructional minutes in ways that we know are going to really pay off. And so when we took a look at the ways in which we can do this, and we developed the model, we call our model the compass. And so we think of the compass as sort of this metaphor that we are multidimensional, and that we have these, we've thought of ourselves as sort of 5 different dimensions. And it's really important that you can learn to balance those 5 different dimensions. And so then we needed to go about thinking about how do we grow and develop across the continuum in those different dimensions. And so there's a lot of time put into thinking about how do we, so if I want to develop my big heart, what does that mean? It means I understand myself as a person, but then I also understand how do I engage in relationships? What's the importance of kindness or gratitude? Why does that really matter? And what are the habits that I would need to develop in order to sort of know where I'm going? And so it was a matter of developing what we call our developmental pathways with these different habits that align to the different dimensions of being a human. So all that sort of complex, and we had to make that all come together into a model, a school model. And a big part of that was just making sure that we have structures in place. So we have a structure every week that we just call it Circle, where it's an opportunity to demonstrate the growth you're making in all of these different dimensions of being a human. But not only to do that, but every time you do that, every time you demonstrate growth in yourself, you're doing that in a relationship-based way. So you're showing up in a community, and others are meeting you. And we believe it takes a ton of vulnerability to show up into a room or a space and say hey, there's this part of myself that isn't fully developed, and I want to really work on getting better at that part of myself. And so we thought it was really important that when you do that and you take that risk, that you're rewarded with a sense of connection. Because we are all relationship-based, we are all driven by connection as human beings. And so creating that structure was really important, but then we also needed to go back and think about, like, how does this show up in the rest of our school day? And so we needed to align our discipline system as well and make it truly restorative. And so when a student leaves the classroom, it's not just a matter of coming back because I'm holding myself accountable and taking responsibility, but it's also assessing relationships were impacted when I left the classroom, including mine and the way I feel valued here. And so how do we repair that in the moment so that we're all feeling connected in the school place? And so we just see it infused, and we've had to find ways to infuse it throughout our entire school day, and then also to infuse it into our curriculum. So we went back and restructured our curriculum so that it's aligned to these habits and this development that all of us are going through. And then I'll say one final thing about our model that was really important is that we don't think that an individual's well-being is something that's just nice to have or sort of like icing on top of the cake. We think it's something that we all will always need to continue to grow at. And in order for the adults in our building to be able to push and support the students and the families in our building to continue to focus on their well-being, we as adults need to know how to do that ourselves. And so we all are doing the same work that our kids are doing. We all are participating in Circle every week and being vulnerable in the workplace and learning how to grow as individuals and as humans, which has been a big risk for all of us. But it's really dramatically changed not only what school looks like for our kids, but also what it means or looks like to show up at work for us as adults. And it's been a transformative experience for all of us.
So India, just a few minutes ago, we were talking about how challenging it is and jarring in some ways to take a group of students and have them go to Thailand for a few months, and then they're about to transition back. So how have you guys thought about preparing them and making sure that they're able and comfortable to fit into a completely new environment and then come back?
That was the very first thing that I worked on. It was top of mind for me, and it's top of mind for me every day. We had an advisory period. We have an advisory period, and a lot of time advisory just becomes, honestly, a waste of instructional time and a point of anxiety for teachers. And I needed it to be very intentional and purposeful. And how can we make this instructional time and also build skills and prepare kids? And I sat down and developed this scope and sequence that went through, okay, what is going to happen to them? They're going to be shocked in these black and brown bodies to go to an Asian country where a lot of people do have preconceived notions of us in these bodies. And actually, I went in October 2017 to set up, and people were pulling my hair and taking pictures and videos, and I was like, ooh, this is gonna happen to teenagers. How will they react? Because I was triggered. So I'm like, we have to do identity work. And that was number one. You need to know exactly who you are, whose you are for a lot of the kids, and what you stand for, what your strengths are, before we put you in a position where someone can impose those beliefs on you. What I found, though, is that not only works for taking students overseas, it works in the classrooms where they are, because teachers bring in their biases every day. And if students are confident in who they are, if they understand their strengths, their abilities, and our students outline what are stereotypes against me, and how can I debunk those stereotypes, and sometimes, how do we reinforce those stereotypes? They are able to fight against the active prejudice, racism, white supremacy that operates against them every day here as well. So that was one way of preparing them. Also, I needed them to know their community's assets and needs before they go over to a country. So we do a lot of service learning and a lot of work they meet with activists, they meet with government officials, they have a lot of exchanges. In each unit, they had a final project where they were basically advocating for people in this community. How can you advocate for people on the other side of the world when your community needs advocacy? They need advocates. So we taught them, we trained them on how to be an advocate for yourself and your community. So then when they went over there, oh my gosh, they were speaking out against the king. We're like, shut up, you can't, come on now, you can go to jail. But they were such advocates, where they're like, what is happening here? These people are being poisoned. And then we're like, make those connections, because people are being poisoned in Flint, Michigan. So how do you speak out there as well? So it was very intentional, and I was talking to you about how I'm intentional now about how have I treated them over this 2 weeks I haven't seen them. I want to reach out to them, but I have to do that release. I have to release them back into their homes. How are they feeling when they come back? And then how do we teach them how to be reflective? and not hate Indiana because it's not Thailand, but appreciate what we have and how we can make it better.
So Thrival, among other models, really thinks about kind of that real world experience, right? And Scott, you're doing a real world experience in a slightly different way and really connecting the path to college and path to career as well. So say more about how that's built into the day-to-day.
Yeah, I mean, one of the decisions we had to make was we wanted our students to really experience the community and as we, again, I talked about access, right? Well, you don't get access unless you have exposure. And so we wanted to expose them to things that they they don't have any idea exist, right? And so what we did was we gathered a lot of industry partners and said, look, this isn't an industry advisory board. We're not going to meet with you for breakfast once a month and then say we're involving industry. We want you to actually help design challenges that our students are going to work on. And so we have that laid out for our students where they get big design challenges, right? So the idea that, like, how do you feed 9 billion people on the planet by the year 2050 was one of our partner challenges. How do you extend a healthy human lifespan, right, was another challenge. So our students get these challenges, they work with the industry partners, they go on field trips, those people come in. Students design their own project because, again, the idea of voice and choice was incredibly important. We're not giving them projects and say, here's a project and here's an outcome that you're supposed to get. It's like, here's a challenge. Go after it. Some students will choose to write code. Some students will make something, right? We think like we put the maker and Boilermaker, like really, really important. And so they go after the project and we use design thinking, go through a process, and eventually they will pitch in front of the industry partner and get feedback from them on that issue. What we do then in the background is we integrate all the academic stuff into that, right? So that you can tie it all to the challenge and make it real, right? The question of when am I ever going to use this is answered through the process. What was really key to us, though, was that things that got in the way we had to jettison. So, for example, you really can't do deep, real project work if you have a master schedule. Because a master schedule is designed to move people efficiently from class to class to class to class. And the complaint we heard all over the country was, we'd love to do that, but this gets in the way. And so we got rid of the master schedule, which means our students create their own schedule on a weekly basis, right? So again, when you talk about voice and choice and having agency, the idea that I have control over where I am and when I am. The what is fixed, right? But we've extended time that way because it turns out, if you don't have a master schedule, you're completely freed up to do lots of other things. I'll also say it's completely terrifying when you don't have a master schedule. That creates all kinds of other issues that I'd be happy to go into later. But the idea is that you let students understand that I'm never going to be sitting in a classroom listening to something that I already know. And if you do that for students, and if you give them a reason to want to know something because it's real, our principal puts it beautifully. Shatoya Ward is a genius at this, and she says, a lot of people talk about students working on real world problems. We have our students working on their world problems, right? Things that are important to them. So when you're talking about feeding 9 billion people on the planet, what piece of that is important to me? And how do I go after that, right? And people started trying to solve for food waste and food deserts and all these other things that are really important to them. And in order to solve that problem, there were things they needed to know, which then allows our teachers to teach content, right? Because you tie that content into something that's important to. So that, and again, the access to people that they never would have met before, scientists and doctors and nurses and pilots, and I mean, all these things, different industries, that has made a complete difference within the school. And because they have agency on when, that idea that I'm forced to go on a rigid schedule goes away, which helps solve a ton of the discipline and the anxiety issues that young people feel.
Carrie, how do you make that real world connection for your kids?
Yeah, so these are a lot of the conversations that we are still having. We're finishing up our second year right now. So we're still pretty new and we have 2 different sites. And that is also part of our model as our students move fairly often, either to a new placement or a new home. And so the idea is we will have smaller sites around Los Angeles so that as they move, they don't have to completely transfer to another school, which has been one of the big problems for them in the past, because then they lose educational time, but they also lose credits. Their transcripts are a mess. We're adding time it's taking for them to graduate. And so we have our 2 sites serving about 160 students right now, and these are the big things that we are talking about. So we did get rid of the kind of 6 periods a day schedule this year and moved into more of an arena schedule, which we learned a lot from and kind of stole and adapted from a school that we were learning from in New York called Bronx Arena. And that opened up a lot more free time for students to really spend time with the teachers that they needed to start filling in the content gaps and thinking about what that looked like in terms of the project-based learning. There are some additional steps we're taking next year because it's still not working exactly right, and it's kind of finding that balance between, to your point, how do you maximize the instructional time that we know is so important, and our students have already been denied that for so long. So how do we maximize that time, but also continue to give them voice and agency over where they have to be when they need to be there, and all the other priorities and responsibilities that they have in their life that are very real. We can't just say you need to be here 9 to 4 every day and pretend like you don't have court dates or kids or a job or that you're not taking care of yourself. And so we're continuing to tweak the arena model piece going into next year so that they have that flexibility. And then the competency-based has been another big one for us in terms of making those real-world connections. Our kids have told us outright, we don't need you to teach us things that we can Google. And they're very right. And that's what a lot of our classes were, I think at the beginning, looking like inadvertently, because that was what we had received in terms of education. And so now it's starting to get away from that and saying, what you don't need is for us to have you memorize these facts, but how do we teach you to navigate such an enormous online community and to find credible articles and to identify bias within those and to think about how you fit into this, your own identity, and what that means for navigating these spaces. Those are the skills that you need. You need to be able to analyze multiple types of media, make sense of it. You need to be have a very deep sense of literacy across multiple forms of media. And so helping them to focus on those higher level skills and competencies that they then know they can transfer to new areas, because they may go off to college and take a science class and say, okay, some of this content I didn't necessarily get to, but I know how to do research. I've had to do it in all of my classes. I know how to seek out help. I know how to advocate for myself. I can read on grade level, and they will know that they can apply those things to new contexts. And we feel like that is the most important thing we can do to get them ready for real world learning, is teaching them the real world skills that we know we need as adults every day.
I may talk about the challenges.
Yeah,
all I keep thinking about is the challenges that we have in this bureaucracy, where we have these innovative ideas or models and we know what the kids need and what works, but we are in systems where, it's just not built for that, and they're so antiquated. So part of our model is experiential learning. We get out there, and what we're talking about, you touch it. And it's so much easier to do that in Thailand because we can walk there, or we have song tiles that take us there. But in Indianapolis, the school system says, you can't leave until 9:30 a.m. and you have to be back by 1:30 p.m. So how much real world can we get? And then the kids have to have lunch, just 3 hours. So there are these systems, or when it's time for grades to go in, they don't care about arena, they don't care about master schedules and the problems with it. They want, this transcript needs to have these credits. And so it's so difficult to do what we know the kids need and what's best for them when the system has not evolved since who knows when.
And I would say then the time that we spend working backwards to translate what we're doing into those systems for reporting and compliance processes takes away from the time that we could be spending with kids having fun learning and actually preparing them for what they need. So it's definitely a challenge, and it can be very frustrating.
I think your point is so key, though. I really see education at this real inflection point of course, we're learner-centered. I think we would all in this room say we're learner-centered. That's our job as educators. But we've focused so much on effective change or transformative change of the individual. And in this moment of time, we have to find the way to figure out how that individual learning and individual change truly connects to system level change, because I don't think we're going to achieve the changes we need within our current system. And what networks can we create? How can we leverage enough between all the schools doing this innovative work, all these organizations, to really change the system itself? Because I think that otherwise we're held to, certain structures that won't allow us to go quite far enough. And so figuring out what those levers of change are, what those key pieces are that truly connects that individual learning to that broader systems change, and be that social justice or ecological. There's so many systems that we really need positive change. And for me, I think that's really where we are in education right now.
So I want to pull on this thread a little bit more. And some of the ways that I see you all changing the system is by codifying and then sharing more of your work and bringing others into the conversation in ways that we didn't really see happen as much even 5 years ago. And so Michelle and Travis, you guys in particular have made an intentional choice, right, to do that. So I'd love to hear more about how you do it, what you do, and how that's playing itself out.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a strength for us, and a bit of our origin story of being part of a larger nonprofit of Teton Science Schools enabled us to kind of utilize some of those relationships and networks. And the two ways mainly that I would say we're scaling impact beyond our local place, because certainly Jackson Hole is a beautiful and outstanding place to be, but it's a very privileged community on many levels, and making sure that we're creating impact on a larger scale is a really important part of our mission. So a few years ago, we launched Place Network Schools, and that established a collaboration of rural schools. It started 2 years ago with 6 schools, with our schools, our campuses, being the hub of that network. Next year, it'll have between 12 and 16 schools across the country. It started with schools in Vermont and Idaho and Wyoming, and next year will represent 11 different states. They're mostly rural schools because there are so many of the problems that we're talking about on this stage today are really represented in rural schools. And they're, on top of that, a big difference from being an urban school is you're pretty disconnected when you're in a small one-room schoolhouse in many circumstances, and really enabling those schools to take our place-based framework and to enable, not to say here it is, do this, but really help those schools understand what that means for their place and how that they can leverage that platform to connect to their place, but then be part of this larger network of educators to have that support and kind of be part of that larger movement, if you will. So that's one really important piece of what we do, and our teachers get to go out and then work as consultants within that network so that they also get to leverage their own impact as educators beyond the classroom without having to step into an administrator role, which we so often see outstanding teachers having to leave to step into administration without having a broader pathway in which to move. And by them being out and going out and sharing what project-based learning looks like, what place-based education looks like, enables them to create their own professional networks as well. And now we're talking about a broader system, a bigger collaborative. And our other program is our graduate program. So we're in our 25th year of our graduate program at Teton Science Schools, and we're really excited because next year, that's a one-year program that we've done in kind of association in partnership with a couple different higher ed institutions. And next year, we're piloting a second-year fellowship. So people that are in that graduate program, which are often interested, some of them have more of a science background, or they might be interested in nonprofit management. But for those interested in education, they actually can spend a year in one of our 2 campuses of our independent school. They'll get a newly developed master's in education in place-based education that we developed in partnership with Antioch University, New England. And then intentionally, they don't stay. So this is healthy attrition of teachers, because we want those teachers to go out into the broader landscape and take what they've learned with us and be able to spread that across a larger network of schools. And so that's another way that pre-service teaching, I think, is so important. And for me, one of the biggest challenges as we talk about these models is making sure that teacher education actually models these really innovative principles as well. If you look at teacher education in this country, it's still fairly traditional. There are some programs that are more innovative, but truly most universities, it's a pretty traditional based program, especially if you're on an accreditation path for that as well. So really thinking about how do we flip that model as well and prepare teachers to teach in an innovative age, because we all know it's really hard. We're talking about a lot of innovation. It's hard to innovate alone. So how do we create these networks that can support and really continue to push that leading edge of innovation? And it's really wonderful. Like, I was the very first year of that graduate program 25 years ago. And so it's great. About half of our executive team at Teton Science Schools has gone through the graduate program. So it's great to see so many that come back then to us after being out in the world and working at other places. So I think those are two important ways to kind of scale impact, is through those networks and making sure that none of us are siloing the amazing work that we're doing, but making sure we're creating those pathways for us to share it with one another.
And for us, we're just babies compared to you guys, but we started, we're only in our 5th year of operation, and I was founding principal our first year with just one middle school, and in that second year, when I had 250 kids at this little, foundling school in Nashville, Tennessee, we had over 1,500 visitors to our school that year, which was overwhelming. It was overwhelming, and you can imagine it was overwhelming my teachers did not want that many people in their classroom, for sure. And so there was just something sort of happening, and this like buzz that was coming around our school, and like word was spreading really quickly. And when I was talking to visitors who would come, and they would say, "Oh, so-and-so, I'm from LA, I'm from Boston, and I heard about your school and wanted to come and see it." And when I asked, like, what was it that you wanted to come and see? And people just said, everybody just says it feels different. Like, you walk in and it feels different. And so there was something like, people just felt like there was like some magical thing happening. And what so many people saw was our circle practice. And we started getting a lot of push from funders, et cetera, to expand and to scale. And we weren't interested in scaling our school, but we thought one way that we could scale our impact would be to share what we know and what we're learning as we develop this model with others. And so it started out as we just wanted to share our model a little bit, and we had a professional learning community, and then we partnered with a couple of networks that said, we want to come and we want you to train us how to do it. And so that put us into like, well, we need to codify this work that we're doing, because we're just kind of figuring it out, and it like exists in a bunch of Google Docs right now. So, but we needed to get funding to do the codification, and learned a lot there. And I think what we've done really well is we've codified the circle practice, the curriculum that we call our badge work that goes with that circle practice. And then we've learned how to codify it in a way where we can sort of train the trainer. And so we now work with our 3rd cohort of schools and networks across the country that are implementing the Compass model in their schools. And so for us, I think like we've done really well at codifying the practice itself. And I think what we're still figuring out is, so a lot of our partners, they're taking a couple of practices from our school, and our practice it's very much integrated into like our school and our community. We built it for this particular part of Southeast Nashville, and we're an intentionally diverse school. And so there are lots of things that work for us, and we've been very, very careful in asking ourselves these ongoing sort of R&D questions, like does this work everywhere else? It's like a big question we have is, will this work in a school that is not diverse? And so that's been really important for us. And so I think what we haven't quite cracked the nut on is, how do you take an innovative practice that grew in one particular setting and like make that transferable into other settings that may be uniquely different. And so I think it's just been really important for us to like continually ask ourselves, like, what are the challenges that our partners are facing that we didn't anticipate? What are the ways in which this model is universal? Like, what is the universality about this model, and what is that's not universal? And so we're still learning that, I would say. And so it's just been really interesting for us. But I think what's helped us is that like our model grew out of this idea of like, what does it mean to be human? And that's a way in which like we're looking at ourselves and our growth and development in ways that are like really pretty different from, I think, the way traditional schools look at growth and development, which is really just like a very sort of like singular idea of what success looks like.
So I want to bridge us into the last question around lessons learned, challenges, battle scars that you all have accumulated over the past couple of years. Scott, I'm going to ask you to start and maybe speak a little bit to growth as well, given I think growth was part of your DNA from the beginning, and how you all have navigated that, and then we'll pepper it around to the rest of the group.
Yeah, so I mean, we always talked about achieving some sense of scale, right? If you're going to attack the problem that I described earlier, you can't do it with just a single entity. You're not going to your impact's going to be really small. So we knew from the beginning that we were going to grow to multiple schools. We'll launch our second school this summer. Third school will come the next year, and then we'll go on from there, and we'll spread around the state of Indiana. But again, much like Travis said to me, our impact, though, I think comes not just from schools that we run. It comes from people who, again, like we've had a lot of visitors, probably more than we should have, given it's just our second year. But the idea that we can influence how people think about things. You know, the challenges are many. Like, I was joking before, when you limit your master schedule, that's awesome. It frees you up. Then you have to go, well, wait a minute, I've got a whole bunch of 14 and 15-year-olds. I should probably know where they are, right? And how do I do that in ways that, because you almost have this inexorable pull back to the norm, right? Stop doing different things because none of the systems work there, right? Imagine a student system that says, oh, it'll be cool if your students actually schedule themselves. And oh, by the way, they're going to do it every week, right? That doesn't exist. And we found what worked in the first year doesn't necessarily work in the second year. So because we had that idea of scale from the very beginning, we knew we had to do some things that would allow us to have that kind of scale from a scheduling standpoint. Just one little piece of nuts and bolts thing. Because if you're not able to do that, it screws up your entire vision of allowing that agency and voice and choice and all that kind of stuff, because it's like, well, I got to maximize use of my human resources, right? We're still a school with funding, and you got to, so we've made a leap to developing our own scheduling system, mainly based more on machine learning, artificial intelligence, that actually can take what students know or don't know and match them with the teacher who has the best skills to do that, right? And really focus on the application level of knowledge, not just the base foundational stuff. So you have to be willing to invest in those things because you know you're going to scale. You have to look at that horizon out there that's 2, 3, 4, 5 years out in the future and go, we've got to solve this problem now because we'll never get to where we want to be unless we don't. And I think that's that idea, if you do that from the beginning and having some experience prior to this, it's like, oh yeah, I learned that lesson in a hard way the first time. Let's do it right this time. And so that's where we've been focusing a lot, and with the sense of urgency around scaling, it also forces you to address the problems now because they're never going to get easier, right? This is, like, as I told our folks, like, this is the most simple we will ever be. It's going to get more complex from here on because we're going to get bigger, and you've got to solve these problems now.
Any other lessons learned or challenges that are proximate for folks?
Okay. I think for me, it's been, what I've learned is that the people who get most excited and thrilled about Thrival and Thrival's model are the people who studied abroad and the people who have privilege. The people who it's most challenging to bring into this work are the people who we came to serve. And that is because we decided this is what the community needed. And that is happening so much where schools, organizations, entities decide what the community needs, what the school district needs. And that, to me, that's just another form of oppression. And I have to reflect on the fact that I became this privileged person who was from this community and feel kind of like I became the oppressor in this community and decided this is what you need. People are so thrilled about what we're doing, but it's not the people who I need to be thrilled about it. And so I want to challenge anyone who's considering opening a school or starting a school or spreading their school model to really have voice from before the beginning. Because we can say, oh, well, we decided we're going to do this and then we talk to the community. That's still backwards. That is still backwards. It was like, now I'm trying to convince you this is what you need. You really should have that community input before you make the decision to, start your school, plant your flag in that community. So that is something that I have to, and I'll spend the rest of my life apologizing for that because I became the guy that I thought I was fighting against.
Carrie, I'm going to look to you to close us out.
Well, I would say similarly, the ongoing challenge for me personally, and I've seen it with our staff too, is that we get really, really excited about these new ideas and can just run with them. And then we're trying to get kids to buy into what we've created, and we present it with all this excitement, and then I mentioned this earlier, it might fall flat. And I have seen there have been times when we've continued to push forward and been like, no, you guys, it's gonna be really good for you, it's gonna be really good for you. You'll see, like, you'll get excited about it. And I think we've had to continually bring ourselves back to a space where we're saying at the end of the day, like, we have to be more committed to our kids than our ideas, even if that means we like invested too much time in it because we waited too long to bring them into the process. And that can be really hard because you do spend a lot of time and you put a lot of heart into this, but if it is not being driven by the people that we're there to serve, if it's not really truly centered in student voice and agency, it doesn't matter. And so I think that's been an ongoing challenge for me, for our staff, where we're trying to push each other and hold each other accountable of, before we get too far down the road and say this is what we're doing, like, is this what kids and families are saying that they need? Because if not, it's pointless. Yeah.
I think for me, one of the big things that I'm taking away from this conversation is just the importance and power of empathetic listening and co-creation. And again, I think this is something that feels different than 5 or 10 years ago. And I'm really excited to see where this takes us forward. So thank you all for the work that you do day to day, and thank you for joining us.